did this?
An unfortunate accident. I am not shaken.
There are some humiliations so public, so calculated, that the room remembers them long after the music stops. The night Sade Okoro lifted a glass of red wine and poured it down Amara Adeyemi's dress in front of 2 cabinet advisors, 5 investors, and half of Lagos's old money elite, nobody moved. Nobody defended her. Not even her husband. And that was the moment everyone in that glittering auction hall made the same fatal mistake. They thought the quiet woman standing in silence had just been destroyed. What they did not know was that the hall they stood in, the land beneath it, the debt behind their businesses, and the future of the empire they were celebrating were all tied to one name: Amara Adeyemi. And before that week was over, every person who watched her humiliation would learn the difference between being rich and being untouchable. The Echo Crown auction was one of those Lagos nights people prepared for weeks in advance. The kind of event where women wore hand-beaded gowns that shimmered under chandelier light like liquid gold, and men walked in with the confidence of people who believed their money could correct any mistake. Cameras waited at the entrance. Security swept the perimeter twice. Drivers lined the street in black SUVs. The guest list had been whispered about for days. Officially, the event was a charity auction benefiting youth innovation across West Africa. Unofficially, it was where business alliances were displayed, relationships were tested, and power introduced itself without ever having to raise its voice. Tunde Adeyemi loved nights like that. He had spent the previous 3 years becoming the face of modern luxury development in Lagos. Waterfront towers, private marinas, smart residences, hospitality ventures. Newspapers called him visionary. Real estate blogs called him unstoppable. Young entrepreneurs called him proof that elegance and ambition could live in the same body. And beside him, almost every recent month, was Sade Okoro. Officially, Sade was his executive director of strategic partnerships. Unofficially, she had become the woman who answered before he did, sat beside him when his wife used to, and smiled with the confidence of someone who had mistaken borrowed access for personal power. Amara saw all of it. She had seen it long before anybody else. That was her gift. Amara was not loud. She was not performative. She did not waste words trying to convince people she mattered. She had learned years earlier that most people revealed more when they believed you were harmless. So she watched. She watched Sade begin by organizing meetings, then dinners, then travel, then presentations, then private conversations that no assistant should have been leading. And she watched her husband allow it all in the lazy, comfortable way powerful men often allow the wrong person to get too close. Slowly, conveniently, and without thinking about the cost until the bill arrives. Amara arrived at the auction at 6:41 p.m., not through the red carpet. Never through the red carpet. Attention had never impressed her. Systems did. She entered through the private side access used by trustees and senior hosts, greeted the venue director by name, checked one revised seating card with a single glance, and moved into a quiet lounge overlooking the main hall. Below her, waiters adjusted silver trays, florists made final corrections, and the auction podium was tested twice. Everything was exactly where it should be. Exactly as she had requested. At 7:03, Tunde entered the hall to applause. He wore a midnight black tuxedo and the polished expression of a man who had been admired so consistently he no longer had to earn it in the moment. On his right was Sade in a fitted gold gown with sharp shoulders and an even sharper smile. Guests turned. Heads nodded. Phones lifted discreetly. Power, to the untrained eye, appeared to have just entered the room. At 7:11, Amara stepped inside. She wore deep emerald silk. No heavy diamonds, no theatrical entrance. Just a clean neckline, a calm posture, and the kind of stillness that only comes from a person who knows more than everyone around her. Several people noticed her. Most did not. That, too, was familiar. Her seat was no longer beside her husband. That had changed gradually over the last year, the way disrespect often changes, little by little, until one day everyone behaves as if the new insult is normal. Tonight, Amara had been placed 3 tables away from the central investor circle. Sade had arranged that. Amara knew because Sade always left fingerprints where she believed no one would look. The evening moved gracefully at first. A violin quartet performed by the staircase. Servers floated between tables with saffron rice canapes, grilled prawns, and crystal glasses catching the amber glow of chandeliers. A development reel played on massive screens, praising Adeyemi Urban Group for reimagining African luxury. Tunde spoke for 12 minutes. He was good at speaking now. He knew when to pause, when to smile, when to talk about resilience, vision, and generational impact in a voice that made investors feel wise for believing in him. What he did not say was that his company's first emergency guarantee had not come from his brilliance. It had come from Amara. He did not say that the first parcel of coastal land that gave his brand legitimacy had passed through a trust Amara advised. He did not say that when his second major lender nearly pulled out 4 years earlier, one late-night call from her had saved everything before sunrise. Tunde had long ago stopped correcting the story people preferred. And the story people preferred was simple. He built the empire. She married into it. That was the lie the room was living on. Then the auction began. Paintings, vintage sculptures, a diamond watch, a private safari package, a signed football jersey that somehow went for more than it deserved. Laughter rose. Numbers climbed. Wealth performed for wealth. Around 8:26, an item was introduced that changed the temperature of the room. A ceremonial framed deed representing the future cultural rights partnership for a new waterfront arts district. Most guests clapped politely. Very few understood its importance. Sade did. Tunde did not. And Amara certainly did. Because that symbolic piece represented access to a land structure no major project could move through without approval from the Adebayo Continental Heritage Trust. A trust chaired quietly, efficiently, and almost invisibly by Amara herself. When the bidding closed, Sade leaned toward one of the guests and said, just loud enough for several tables to hear, "Some people are lucky to attend rooms like this. Others are born to own them." There was soft laughter. Her eyes drifted toward Amara. The message was not subtle. Amara lifted her glass, took a small sip of water, and said nothing. That silence irritated Sade more than argument would have. People like Sade relied on visible reaction. They needed flinching. They needed tears. They needed disruption. Without it, their cruelty had nowhere to land. By 9:02, guests rose from their seats and spread into smaller circles. Investors moved toward the bourbon table. Two governors' wives stood near the floral wall discussing London schools. Three younger founders hovered around Tunde, hoping for introductions. Sade remained attached to his side, receiving admiration as though it belonged to her. Amara walked alone toward the back gallery, where several architectural models had been displayed under glass. She stood before one model in particular, a sleek, impossible cluster of towers by the water, branded with her husband's company name. It would never rise without her signature. She wondered whether he knew that. A voice came from behind her. "You like looking at things you can't touch?" Amara turned slowly. Sade stood there with two women beside her, and a nearly empty glass of red wine in hand. One of the women gave a nervous smile. The other looked away immediately, already sensing danger. Amara's expression did not change. "If you came to impress me," she said softly, "you should have brought substance instead of spectators." The air tightened. Sade laughed, but it came out a little too sharp. "You've always had this habit," she said, "pretending you're above things you don't understand." Amara looked at her for a moment. Then she answered in the same calm voice, "And you've always had the opposite problem." The second woman stepped back. She wanted no part of what came next. Sade moved closer. From where Tunde stood, less than 15 feet away, he could see them. He did not move. That mattered later. "You should learn to stay in your place," Sade said. Amara's gaze remained steady. "My place?" "Yes," Sade replied. "The decorative corner. The quiet wife. The woman who appears, smiles, and lets real work happen around her." It was a reckless sentence. Not because it was insulting, because it was wrong. And wrong, when spoken publicly to the right person at the wrong time, becomes expensive. Amara tilted her head very slightly. "You've confused proximity with importance," she said. For the first time that night, Sade's smile slipped. Then vanity took over where wisdom should have entered. She lifted the wine glass. For a second, maybe less, one of the women beside her whispered, "Sade, don't." But Sade had already decided. The wine fell in a crimson streak down the front of Amara's emerald gown. A sharp sound escaped the nearest guest. Not a scream, a gasp. The kind made by people who know they have just witnessed something irreversible. The red spread slowly across the silk. The room quieted in pieces. One table stopped laughing, then another. A waiter froze. A banker lowered his drink. Tunde turned. He saw his wife standing in a stained dress. He saw Sade with an empty glass. And then he made the choice that ended the version of his life he thought would last forever. He hesitated. Sade smiled with the brittle confidence of someone stepping off a cliff before realizing there is no bridge. "Oh dear," she said. "Security should clean this up. We can't have the wrong people spoiling the evening." Wrong people. Not woman. Not guest. Not wife. Wrong people. Several heads turned toward Tunde. This was the moment. The one in which a husband either became a man worth respecting or exposed the rot inside him. He did neither fast enough. And that was enough. Amara looked at him. Not with pain. That would have been easier for him. Not with anger either. No. What she gave him was far more dangerous. Clarity. Absolute, final clarity. In that instant, She understood that whatever remained between them had not been weakened tonight. It had ended. She reached for a linen napkin from a nearby tray, pressed it once lightly against the stain, and turned toward Sade. When she spoke, her voice was so calm that people leaned in to hear it. "Thank you," she said. Sade blinked. "For what?" "For making this simple." Then Amara placed the napkin back on the tray and walked away. No tears, no shouting, no scene. And somehow, that made the silence in the room even worse. Behind her, Tunde finally said, "Amara." She did not stop. Outside, the Lagos night was warm and humming with traffic. Her driver opened the rear door, but she did not get in immediately. She stood still beside the car, the city lights reflected in the dark glass beside her. 30 seconds later, Tunde appeared. "Listen," he said, lowering his voice. "Sade went too far." Amara looked at him. He had expected outrage, maybe crying, maybe demands, maybe a wife asking whether he still loved her. What he found instead was a woman who no longer needed anything from him. "Yes," she said. "She did." He exhaled, relieved for a foolish second, as if agreement meant recovery. Then Amara continued, "And you stood there long enough for everyone in that room to measure your character." His jaw tightened. "You know it's not that simple." "It became simple," she said, "the moment you chose comfort over truth." "Amara." "Tomorrow," she said, opening the car door herself, "you'll discover how expensive hesitation can be." She got in. The door closed, and for the first time in years, Tunde Adeyemi felt fear without understanding its source. At 11:18 p.m., Amara entered her study. Unlike the rest of the penthouse, the room had no decorative vanity, no pointless art chosen by consultants, no trophy displays of success. It had books, files, internal memos, legal folders, trust reports, debt schedules, land maps, board notes. Reality lived there. She changed out of the stained gown, folded it herself, and placed it carefully into a garment box as if preserving evidence. Then she opened her laptop. 9 unread messages waited. 1 from the legal chair of the Heritage Trust, 2 from institutional partners, 1 from a senior lender in Nairobi, 1 from an investor she had not spoken to directly in 8 months, and 1 from Chief Adewale Banjoko, the oldest independent trustee on the board. His message was 5 words long. "Proceed if you are ready." Amara read it once. Then she replied with 3 words. "Begin the review." She sent 2 more emails after that. The first requested an emergency audit of all authorization pathways tied to Adeyemi Urban Group's pending expansion vehicles. The second temporarily froze approval movement on the Atlantic Crescent mixed-use waterfront package until trustees completed full internal verification. By midnight, 3 quiet processes were already moving. No shouting, no scandal, no revenge speech. Just paper, signatures, and consequence. At 7:06 the next morning, Tunde's phone rang before he had finished his first cup of coffee. The call came from one of his principal investors. The tone was polite. The content was not. There were concerns, he was told. Questions regarding debt sequencing. Questions regarding land exposure. Questions regarding authority delegation. Questions regarding why a review had been triggered overnight. By 7:43, a second call came. Then a third. At 8:12, his chief financial officer asked for an emergency meeting. At 8:30, Sade walked into headquarters wearing white and gold, still confident, still beautiful, still completely unaware that the floor beneath her had already begun to crack. She entered Tunde's office without knocking. "I heard lenders are panicking," she said. "Give it a day. It'll settle." Normally, that voice reassured him. Today, it sounded reckless. He looked up slowly. "What exactly happened with Amara last night?" Sade folded her arms. "She provoked me." "How?" The question caught her off balance. She had not prepared specifics because people protected by charm rarely expect to need evidence. She was being disrespectful. Tunde stared. That was not an answer. And for the first time, he noticed something he should have seen months earlier. Sade was strongest when nobody asked follow-up questions. Before he could speak again, his office line rang. His assistant transferred the call without waiting for permission. It was Chief Benjoko. The old man did not waste time. "Mr. Adeyemi," he said, "you need to understand that the trust has initiated review action on Atlantic Crescent." Tunde sat upright. "On whose authority?" There was a pause. Then the answer came. "On the chairwoman's." His grip tightened around the phone. "The chairwoman?" "Yes." Tunde swallowed. "And who exactly signed off on that?" Another pause. This one felt almost surgical. "Your wife." Silence filled the room so completely that even Sade, standing across the desk, sensed everything had changed. When the call ended, Tunde remained still. Sade frowned. "What is it?" He looked at her, but not the way he had looked at her the week before. No warmth, no indulgence, only calculation. "What is Amara's role with the Heritage Trust?" he asked. Sade laughed lightly. "How would I know?" That was when he realized the truth in layers. Sade did not know. She had humiliated a woman without first understanding who she was. And he, far more unforgivably, had married that woman without bothering to ask what worlds she moved in when she was not standing beside him. Across the city, Amara sat at the head of a polished walnut table on the 34th floor of the Adebayo Continental Heritage Trust. No one interrupted her there. No one called her decorative. No one mistook her stillness for weakness. 12 people sat around that table. Auditors, trustees, counsel, risk partners, land governance specialists. A series of files had been opened overnight. What they found was not fraud severe enough to destroy the company immediately. What they found was worse for men like Tunde. Carelessness. Approvals passed too casually. Dependencies ignored. Recommendations accepted because they came from familiar voices instead of qualified ones. And scattered across several internal pathways, repeated traces of Sade's influence where there should have been none. One legal advisor adjusted his glasses and said, "The governance issue is survivable if addressed now." Another added, "If not addressed, the expansion vehicle becomes exposed on multiple fronts within 60 days. Amara listened without emotion. That was what frightened serious people most about her. She never exaggerated. She never panicked. She never had to. Finally, Chief Banjoko looked toward her. "Madam Chair, your recommendation?" Amara folded her hands. "Freeze expansion approvals for 30 days. Remove all informal authorization access. Demand written accountability from executive leadership. Continue the review." No one argued. The motion passed. At 11:14 a.m., Sade received a formal notice. Pending internal investigation, her access to executive approvals was suspended. At 11:22, her calendar changed. At 11:27, 2 external meetings disappeared. At 11:41, a compliance officer requested archived communications from the last 9 months. Her confidence finally cracked. She went straight to Tunde's office. "This is insane," she said. "Somebody is targeting me." Tunde did not offer her a seat. "Did you pour wine on my wife in front of investors and government partners?" Sade stared. "That's not the point." "It is exactly the point. She embarrassed me." He held her gaze. "And now you're learning the cost of embarrassing the wrong person." Her face changed then. Not to guilt, to fear. Because something in his tone told her he no longer saw her as an ally to protect. He saw her as a liability, connected to a much larger mistake. That evening, the city began whispering. Not on front pages yet, not in headline scandal, but in private clubs, boardrooms, and backseat phone calls where Nigeria's real decisions were often made. People started asking a strange question. Who exactly is Amara Adeyemi? One investor remembered seeing her at a closed infrastructure forum in Accra. Another recalled that 2 years earlier, a London fund partner had greeted her first before speaking to Tunde. A retired banking chairman said he once saw 3 older trustees stand when she entered a room. Alone, those details meant little. Together, they formed a frightening picture. The woman everyone thought was ornamental had been structural all along. That night, Tunde came home early. Amara was on the terrace, city lights spread beneath her like a second sky. For several seconds, he simply looked at her. "How long?" he finally asked. She did not turn immediately. "How long what?" "How long have you chaired the trust? 6 years?" The answer landed harder than accusation. "6 years?" he repeated. "And you never told me?" Amara looked at him then, and there was something almost merciful in her expression, because the truth she was about to say was simple enough to hurt forever. "I never hid it," she said. "You stopped listening." He looked away. Because she was right. Years earlier, he had asked about her work, her opinions, her meetings, her concerns. Then success expanded, applause increased, and attention shifted toward easier admiration. He had not been deceived. He had become careless. "The company," he said quietly. "Was it really your trust that backed the emergency guarantee?" "Yes." "And Atlantic Crescent?" "The land pathway touches our structure." His mouth opened, then closed again. All the stories he had told about himself suddenly felt incomplete. Not false exactly, just edited in his favor. "Why didn't you destroy the deal outright?" he asked. Amara turned back toward the skyline. "Because correction and destruction are not the same thing. One teaches, the other wastes." Inside a luxury apartment in Ikoyi, Sade did not sleep. Every email made things worse. The review had widened. It was no longer about one public incident at an auction. It was about influence, conduct, unauthorized signaling, misplaced authority, and the dangerous habit of speaking as though proximity to a powerful man made her untouchable. By morning, one of her few remaining allies inside the company called with a warning. "The board is checking everything," he said. "Not just the event, months of it." When the call ended, Sade sat in silence, replaying the auction in her mind. Not the wine, not the room. Amara's face. That calm. That terrifying calm. Only now did she understand why it haunted her. Power usually announced itself. Real power didn't need to. By Friday, the board review was complete enough for consequences to become visible. A formal restructuring memo was sent. Several internal privileges were revoked. All executive partner communications were centralized. And Sade Okoro was placed on full administrative suspension pending termination review. She called Tunde 6 times. No answer. On the 7th, he picked up. "They're removing me," she said, panic rising in her voice. "You have to stop this." He closed his eyes before replying. "I can't." "You won't," she snapped. "No," he said, more quietly than she expected. "I can't." Because now he understood something she had not. There are doors money can open. There are doors beauty can open. There are doors access can open. And then there are doors that only legacy, trust, and quiet authority can move. Amara held those doors, not him. That evening, Amara attended a private dinner with 6 institutional backers and 2 trustees. No cameras, no speeches, no charity theatrics. Just polished wood, low light, and serious people discussing whether Adeyemi Urban Group could survive the damage done by one woman's vanity and one man's weakness. Richard Ikanem, the oldest investor at the table, finally said, "You've had the power to end him all week." Amara set down her glass. "Yes." "But you didn't." "No." "Why?" She gave the answer without drama. "Because I wanted the lesson to outlive the humiliation." Nobody spoke after that for several seconds. Not because the sentence was loud, because it was precise. And precision, in the hands of someone powerful, can feel more dangerous than rage. 3 days later, Sade received the final letter. Her employment was terminated, effective immediately. A separate legal review would remain open. Her access was revoked, her internal recommendations nullified, her corporate devices surrendered. The woman who once moved through the building like a second sun vanished in one afternoon. People who had laughed at her jokes stopped answering her calls. People who once chased her attention suddenly remembered meetings elsewhere. Influence evaporates quickly when it was rented instead of earned. The following Monday, Tunde appeared before the board. He admitted failures in oversight. He admitted that personal comfort had compromised executive discipline. He admitted he had trusted image over substance. For a long time, the room said nothing. Then Chief Benjoko asked the only question that mattered. "Have you learned the difference between being admired and being accountable?" Tunde answered honestly, "Yes." For the first time in months, that answer meant something. Weeks later, Atlantic Crescent was allowed to proceed under strict, revised governance conditions. The project survived. The company survived. But the mythology around Tunde did not. It returned leaner, humbler, and stripped of performance. As for Amara, people finally began saying her name correctly in rooms where it should have been said years earlier. Not as someone's wife, not as an elegant figure at the edge of a photograph, but as what she had always been, a builder of systems, a guardian of legacy, a woman whose silence had fooled fools and warned the wise. One late evening, long after the worst had passed, Tunde stood beside her again on the terrace. The city shimmered beneath them, restless and magnificent. "I should have defended you," he said. Amara did not answer immediately. He continued, "I should have respected what I did not understand, and I should have asked who you were long before the world forced me to find out. At last, she turned toward him. The world did not force you, she said. Consequence did. He lowered his eyes, because there was nothing to argue with. And now? He asked. Amara looked back over Lagos, at the lights, the traffic, the motion of a city forever rewarding those who paid attention and swallowing those who confused noise for substance. Now, she said, you decide whether embarrassment changed you or only exposed you. He nodded once, not because he liked the answer, because he knew he had earned it. And somewhere across the same city, in a smaller apartment with no assistants, no invitations, and no one left to impress, Sade Okoro sat alone with a truth she could no longer outrun. She had not lost her future because of one glass of wine. She lost it because arrogance had convinced her that the quietest woman in the room was the weakest one. She was wrong. Everyone had been wrong. Because the most dangerous person in a room full of status is not always the loudest one. Sometimes she is the woman standing in silence while everyone else misreads her. Sometimes she is the person who owns the ground beneath the stage. Sometimes she is the one who never needed revenge, only recognition. And by the time they finally gave Amara Adeyemi hers, it was already too late to save themselves.